Welcome to Washington Today on CSpan Radio from Monday, March 4th, 2024. The Supreme Court rules that Colorado cannot keep former President Donald Trump off its presidential primary ballot under the Constitution's 14th Amendment prohibiting those engaged in insurrection or rebellion from holding office again. The Supreme Court writes, because the Constitution makes Congress, rather than the states, responsible for enforcing Section 3 against federal office holders and candidates, we reverse. Coming up, reaction from Donald Trump and Democratic Congressman Jamie Raskin, an analysis of the decision from Associated Press Supreme Court reporter Mark Sherman. Tomorrow is Super Tuesday, when 15 states hold presidential primaries or caucuses. Republican candidate Nikki Haley is in one of those states, Texas. Congress this week will be voting on a package of bipartisan government spending bills, but there is a significant Republican opposition to the deal negotiated by the Republican leaders of the House and Senate with the Democratic leaders. We'll get the latest from congressional reporter with The Hill, Aris Foley. Vice President Kamala Harris talking about meeting with Israeli War Cabinet member Benny Gantz in Washington on the war between Israel and Hamas and the desperate humanitarian situation in Gaza. That meeting despite fierce opposition from Prime Minister Benajmin Netanyahu. And this is a day after the vice president called for an immediate 6-week ceasefire. Plus, the State Department talks about Haiti under state of emergency now due to widespread violence from gangs. First Lady Jill Biden at the annual International Women of Courage Awards at the White House. And former First Lady and Secretary of State Hillary Clinton launching a women's initiative at Columbia University. Story from Yahoo News. Former President Donald Trump was handed a major victory on Monday when the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that he cannot be excluded from Colorado's primary election ballot over his actions surrounding the January 6, 2021 attack on the U.S. Capitol. Big win for America, Trump posted on Truth Social, his social media platform. The former president had appealed the Colorado Supreme Court's decision to disqualify him under the 14th Amendment, Section 3, the so-called insurrection clause of the U.S. Constitution. The unanimous decision came just one day before Colorado voters head to the polls on Super Tuesday. That was from Yahoo News. Donald Trump spoke about this at his home and club Mar-a-Lago in Florida.
I want to start by thanking the Supreme Court for its unanimous decision today. It was a very important decision. We're very well crafted, and I think it will go a long way toward bringing our country together, which our country needs. And they worked long, they worked hard, and frankly, they worked very quickly on something that will be spoken about 100 years from now and 200 years from now. Extremely important. Essentially, you cannot take somebody out of a race because an opponent would like to have it that way. And it has nothing to do with the fact that it's the leading candidate, whether it was the leading candidate or a candidate that was well down on the totem pole. You cannot take somebody out of a race. The voters can take the person out of the race very quickly, but a court shouldn't be doing that, and the Supreme Court saw that very well. And I really do believe that will be a unifying factor, because while most states were thrilled to have me, there were some that didn't, and they didn't want that for political reasons. They didn't want that because of poll numbers, because the poll numbers are very good. We're beating President Biden in almost every poll. New York Times came out yesterday with a very big poll for us. So they didn't like that, and you can't do that. You can't do what they tried to do. And hopefully Colorado, as an example, will unify. I know there's tremendous support. They brought our support up very strong in Colorado because people in Colorado thought that was a terrible thing that they did. And while we're on the subject, and another thing that will be coming up very soon will be immunity for a president, and not immunity for me, but for any president. If a president doesn't have full immunity, you really don't have a president, because nobody that is serving in that office will have the courage to make, in many cases, what would be the right decision, or it could be the wrong decision. It could be, in some cases, the wrong decision, but they have to make decisions, and they have to make them free of all terror that can be rained upon them when they leave office or even before they leave office.
Donald Trump, former president and Republican presidential candidate this year, at his home and club Mar-a-Lago, Palm Beach, Florida. That presidential immunity case goes before the Supreme Court for oral argument on April 22nd. Colorado, Illinois, and Maine had all removed Donald Trump from the ballot under Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, and the officials there have now issued statements saying that he is back on those states' primary ballots. Today's ruling also ends efforts in over a dozen other states to keep Donald Trump off the ballot under the Constitution's insurrection clause. U.S. House Speaker Mike Johnson, Republican from Louisiana, posting on X today, the U.S. Supreme Court affirmed what we all knew. The Colorado Supreme Court engaged in a purely partisan attack against the front-runner for the Republican presidential primary. States engaging in the same activist, undemocratic behaviors should take notice and leave it to the American people to decide who will be president. That was the statement from Speaker Mike Johnson. And Colorado Secretary of State Jenna Griswold, a Democrat, posting, I am disappointed in the U.S. Supreme Court's decision stripping states of the authority to enforce Section 3 of the 14th Amendment for federal candidates. Colorado should be able to bar oath-breaking insurrectionists from our ballot. Congressman Jamie Raskin, Democrat from Maryland, interviewed today on CNN about the decision.
Obviously, the Supreme Court did not want to step up to the plate and deal with the clear textualist meaning of Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, much less did they want to deal with the original purposes of Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, which was to keep out of federal office people who had already proven themselves disloyal and untrustworthy.
Congressman Raskin also asked whether, if the Supreme Court says that Congress is the one that needs to enforce this section, will the House do that in the case of Donald Trump?
The vote to impeach Donald Trump for inciting an insurrection against the Constitution was 232 to 197, and we were joined by 10 Republicans at the time, including famously, of course, Liz Cheney and Adam Kinzinger. Most of those members are gone. A couple of them are still around, but it seems like Mike Johnson and the leadership of the GOP are very clearly under the spell of Donald Trump and would probably do everything they could to keep this from going to the floor, even though it's just the mere enforcement of a clear constitutional command, as the Supreme Court itself pointed out. They're just saying we're not the ones to do it. Congress has to be the one to do it.
Congressman Jamie Raskin, Democrat from Maryland, on CNN. The president of CREW, Citizens for Responsibility and Ethics in Washington, Noah Bookbinder, putting out a statement. While the Supreme Court allowed Donald Trump back on the ballot on technical legal grounds, this was in no way a win for Trump. The Supreme Court had the opportunity in this case to exonerate Trump, and they chose not to do so. The fact that not a single justice today issued a single sentence disputing the finding that Donald Trump engaged in insurrection is incredibly telling. Yes, they let him off on a technicality, but there's no question that he is an oath-breaking insurrectionist. That was from the president of CREW, Noah Bookbinder. And the campaign manager, principal deputy campaign manager of the Biden-Harris 2024 campaign, Quentin Fulks, was on MSNBC responding, saying, we don't really care. It's not been the way we've been planning to beat Donald Trump. Our focus since day one of launching this campaign has been to defeat Donald Trump at the ballot box. Jay Sekulow, chief legal counsel for the American Center for Law and Justice, whose clients were involved in this case, reacting in a video posted on X.
Just got the decision from the Supreme Court of the United States on the disqualification case. This is the case out of Colorado. We represented the Colorado Republican Party. Remember, they were trying to remove President Trump off the ballot. The decision came out today, this morning, just now. I am happy to report that we've had a unanimous victory, 9-0. All 9 justices agreed with the position we advocated, that the states do not have the authority to remove a presidential candidate from the ballot, that solely rests with Congress, which is exactly, by the way, what the 14th Amendment Section 3 says. So this is a huge win, the most significant win, and it should end all of these other cases. It will end all of these other cases. Now, we're going to be on our radio broadcast at noon Eastern. We're going to really get into this in great length. But I want to reiterate again here what's happened. The Supreme Court, remember, we moved this on an expedited basis. We filed our petition December 27th. Briefs were due by the middle of January. Case was argued February 8th. Here we are, March 4th. The decision's rendered. And again, I am happy to report it is unanimous. It's called a per curiam opinion, which means all the justices signed on to it. It's not written by one justice. It was a collective effort. I think in a case like that, like this, that's very important because it sends a message to the country. But all these pundits that said, oh, Colorado has the authority and we have to allow the states to do this, got it wrong.
Attorney Jay Sekulow in a video. Associated Press article begins, the Supreme Court on Monday unanimously restored Donald Trump to 2024 presidential primary ballots, rejecting state attempts to ban the Republican former president over the Capitol riot. On the phone is AP Supreme Court reporter Mark Sherman. Thanks for being with us. The court said only Congress has the power to enforce the insurrection clause of the 14th Amendment. What were their reasons for reaching that conclusion?
Well, they said that basically otherwise there would be a patchwork of and chaotic situation if state by state states could undertake efforts to ban a presidential candidate or any candidate for federal office, candidates for Congress as well. The court said that the 14th Amendment has a provision that says Congress basically make laws to enable the enforcement of the amendment, and that in this case, the only way the amendment can be enforced is through an act of Congress.
This was a unanimous decision. Any surprise there?
Well, no, not really. I mean, when the court heard argument just less than a month ago, it seemed pretty clear that there was a consensus in favor of ruling for Trump in some way, and finding that Congress had to act seemed to be one of those ways. Now, although the outcome was unanimous, there were two separate opinions which suggested that the justices were not totally in agreement. In fact, the three liberal justices wrote a fairly strident dissent in which they said that the court went too far in deciding more than it had to, basically about how Congress has to act if it wanted to disqualify someone from holding office.
You write it's unclear whether the ruling leaves open the possibility Congress could refuse to certify the election if Donald Trump or any other presidential candidate it sees as having violated Section 3. What brought about that question?
Well, it's really it's a combination of what is written in the unsigned opinion for the court, as well as in the dissent written by the three liberal justices. And there's a line in the opinion that the sort of general federal laws are not sufficient in order to invoke Section 3, that Congress would have to act specifically. And while it's unsaid, the suggestion seems like it could be applying to something like the Electoral Count Act, which is the federal law that basically spells out how Congress can go about rejecting electoral votes. Now, I do want to stress that it's not clear, even among election experts, precisely how this decision applies.
We're talking with Mark Sherman from the Associated Press. This was an unsigned opinion. What does that mean? Well,
Supreme Court opinions often are written by a justice, signed by a justice, and then the justice has to cobble together a majority of the court. But sometimes in cases of, national importance, and particularly when the court acts quickly, as it did in this case, the justices will get together and issue an opinion of the court, speaking for the court, but without being, in the words of one justice or another.
Donald Trump, when he was reacting to the decision, said that this will be remembered for 200 years. Is it that important?
Well, it seems to be. Let me say a couple of things about that. First of all, of course, the insurrection clause has been rarely invoked in American history, and it was attempted to be put to use by folks only after the January 6, 2021 attack on the Capitol, which was the culmination of efforts to overturn the 2020 election results. So it's quite a significant decision, and there were folks on both sides who feared that the provision might be used a little too loosely going forward. And then there are folks who said that, what happened on January 6th was so extraordinary that it was silly to think that this amendment would be invoked, willy-nilly over the years.
Mark Sherman, Associated Press Supreme Court reporter. You can find his articles at apnews.com. Thank you very much.
My pleasure.
And a note about another court case involving Donald Trump. This from ABC News. Alan Weisselberg, the ex-chief financial officer of former President Donald Trump's family real estate company, pleaded guilty Monday to perjury charges resulting from his testimony during Trump's civil fraud trial, conceding he knowingly misled investigators about his knowledge of the size of Trump Tower triplex in order to obtain favorable loans, insurance rates, and other economic benefits, according to Gary Fishman, who presented the perjury case for the Manhattan District Attorney's Office. The judge said that Weisselberg, who turned 77 in August, will be sentenced to 5 months in jail on April 10th. He was released on his own recognizance. Tomorrow is Super Tuesday, when 15 states and one territory hold presidential primaries and caucuses. Over a third of the available delegates for both the Republicans and Democratic nominations are up for grabs. Republican candidate Nikki Haley held a rally today in Spring, Texas, one of those states, and she talked about the Supreme Court case.
The Supreme Court ruled today that Donald Trump could stay on the ballot. And no, I think that was important. We don't ever want some elected official in a state or anybody else saying who can and can't be on a ballot. This is America. This is America. Look, I'll defeat Donald Trump fair and square, but I want him on that ballot. But this is also about the fact that what's happening in America. Because at no point is anybody, Joe Biden or Donald Trump, talking about our debt, talking about the wasteful spending, talking about how taxpayer dollars are being abused. But Donald Trump's not going to, because he put us $8 trillion in debt in just 4 years. Now, he loves to say that was about COVID. That was less than 20%. And what happened? I think we need to shrink the size of government. He grew the size of government. I think we need to clean out our agencies. He added to them. I think we need to make sure that we have more ability to have people on the ground get those resources than Washington, D.C., and he allowed D.C. to continue on. But more than that, we have to talk about this debt. Because that's national security, when we are losing the value of a dollar, when it is shrinking because we're not spending. And what are Republicans doing? They're following Donald Trump's lead. That's why they open up the pet projects and the earmarks. That's why they continue to spend. And then what else are we seeing? You're seeing the fact that in national security, it was always peace through strength. It was always that we need more friends because our alliances intimidated the enemy. And now you see Donald Trump's walking back from that. There is nothing worse than America alone. Because if you have America alone, when we need something, they are not going to be there for us. And we can never be so arrogant to think we won't need friends, because we will. And we need to focus on what it takes to get America back on track. America is so distracted right now. And when America's distracted, the world is less safe. And that's playing out.
Republican presidential candidate Nikki Haley, former South Carolina governor, former U.S. ambassador to the UN, today in Spring, Texas, one of the 15 Super Tuesday presidential primary and caucus voting states. Over the weekend, Nikki Haley won the Republican presidential primary in the District of Columbia, her first victory in the campaign for president. She won all 19 delegates at stake, beating Donald Trump 63% to 33%. She posted on X, Republicans closest to Washington's dysfunction know that Donald Trump has brought nothing but chaos and division for the past 8 years. It's time to start winning again and move our nation forward. Donald Trump posting on his Truth Social platform, I purposely stayed away from the D.C. vote because it is the swamp. With very few delegates and no upside, Bird Brain spent all of her time, money, and effort there. Over the weekend, we won Missouri, Idaho, and Michigan, big numbers. Complete destruction of a very weak opponent. The really big numbers will come on Super Tuesday, that post from Donald Trump. CSpan spoke this morning with Hannah Knowles, Washington Post national politics reporter, about the race for president.
I guess the first question is, will any primary be competitive tomorrow, or is this going to be another sweep for Donald Trump and Joe Biden?
Yeah, we're really expecting another sweep for Donald Trump. Nikki Haley is still in the race, and she said she's going to stay in the race up until Super Tuesday. She's kept it vague after that, so we could see a kind of quick exit here potentially, but we don't know what her plans are.
So what will be the storylines that you're watching tomorrow? Whether Nikki Haley can keep it close in a few states?
Not even keep it close, really. I mean, Trump has won in a landslide in most of these places. Haley did win the D.C. Primary this weekend. That makes her the first woman to win a Republican presidential primary. But, it's 15 states. It's the territory of American Samoa as well. Trump's pretty much expected to get them all. We will be looking at, the margin is sort of interesting, and it gives some clues about who is already in Trump's camp and who in the Republican coalition might be still sort of hesitant about him and might need some persuading.
On the Democratic side of the aisle, last week we saw that uncommitted campaign in Michigan that racked up about 100,000 votes. Is Joe Biden facing more uncommitted voter campaigns in other states for Super Tuesday tomorrow?
That was really concentrated in Michigan, where there is an especially high population of Arab American voters who really spearheaded that, and they're outraged at what's happening in Gaza. So I don't think we probably won't see the same level of, organized effort and the same kind of high percentage of uncommitted. But Biden does still have vulnerabilities in that all the polling, the general election polling, shows that his kind of coalition that helped him win in 2020 is showing cracks, and there's just very low enthusiasm. And so, I think we expect him to sweep as well, but that doesn't mean that there are problems and worries that his team has.
Hannah Knowles, Washington Post national politics reporter, joining C-SPAN on our morning program, The Washington Journal. And on Super Tuesday, we will have our coverage of the results from the presidential primaries and caucuses in the 15 states and one territory beginning at 8 p.m. Eastern. We'll have the candidate speeches, the victory and concession speeches, and take your calls and have analysis. 8 p.m. Eastern on Tuesday on C-SPAN Radio and television. Listen anywhere on your smart speaker. Say play C-SPAN Radio or follow us on the C-SPAN Now mobile app. This is Washington Today. Congress is not in session today. On Sunday, congressional leaders unveiled a bipartisan package of 6 government spending bills, a total of $460 billion. Both the House and Senate expected to vote on it this week ahead of Friday's deadline to avoid a partial government shutdown. House Speaker Mike Johnson, Republican, writing, House Republicans secured key conservative policy victories, rejecting left-wing proposals, and imposed sharp cuts to agencies and programs critical to the president's agenda. This legislation forbids the Department of Justice from targeting parents exercising their right to free speech before school boards, while it blocks the Biden administration from stripping Second Amendment rights from veterans. It imposes deep cuts to EPA, ATF, and FBI, which under the Biden administration have threatened our freedoms and our economy, while it fully funds veterans' health care. Part of the statement from House Speaker Mike Johnson. The Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, a Democrat, putting out a statement. Among the good things Democrats help secure in this package, I am particularly proud that it fully funds the vital WIC program, makes critical investments in our infrastructure, and strengthens programs that benefit services for our veterans. Throughout the negotiations, Democrats fought hard to protect against cuts to housing and nutrition programs and keep out harmful provisions that would further restrict access to women's health or roll back the progress we've made to fight climate change. And the majority leader in the Senate, Chuck Schumer, saying the bill avoids a government shutdown without cuts or poison pill riders. We spoke this morning with Aris Foley, the Hill congressional reporter, about the spending package.
Right now, Congress is staring down a March 8 and March 22 deadline. March 8 is for offices like agriculture, FDA, justice, commerce, interior, energy. That's kind of seen as one of the easier deadlines. They just announced a deal yesterday for a package that would entail bills that are upcoming due for the March 8 deadline. But March 22 is where the harder agencies are coming up that people are already looking at, that they feel like is the tougher deadline that includes funding for Homeland Security, Pentagon, labor, health and human services, education. And so that's going to be really interesting to see. And that's they enacted that as part of the stopgap plan that passed last week.
Members think they have enough time here for that larger package on the 22nd? And kind of what's the state of those negotiations right now? What are the sticking points?
Right. I think that members have definitely started to look ahead. Right. Appropriators have been working on crafting these bills, all of these bills, for the past few weeks. I think the problem is just that those bills, it's a little bit harder to come to agreement on. At the same time, Homeland Security, State Department, even the State Department bill is something that is seen as people crafting it see it more as a policy bill, right, than a funding bill. There's a lot of different things going on worldwide right now, different types of provisions that people are pushing for. We will see what ends up coming up. I mean, the sticking points early on, they're even FSG, the Financial Services General Government, they've already been talking about IRS funding, election security. So they've been pretty hush about like specific details, but I'm expecting a lot more to come out in the weeks ahead.
There's a potential for a 1% across the government shutdown if Congress, 1% across the government budget cut if Congress can't come to a deal. How would that happen? Remind viewers of when that would kick in.
Right, so the idea is that would kick in after April if Congress fails to pass its funding bills on time. Congress already has, technically under the debt limit deal that passed last year, kind of kind of triggered the penalty. It just hasn't taken effect yet. There is also a lot of confusion as to how that would take effect if they were to do something like a year-long stopgap bill, which isn't really possible, but it's something that conservatives wanted, and how cuts would carry out in that regard if they would look different, right, from what's expected to happen after April 30th. But yeah, it would take how it's been explained to me is that it would take effect across the board, and it would be kind of indiscriminate cuts. So it's not like if you work for the education department, you decide, oh, I'm going to do 1% and I'm going to decide how this is going. Like, no, it's from how it's been explained that it would be program by program. But there are still a lot of different interpretations around how this cut would be implemented if they were to come to that point. But I don't think Republicans and Democrats want that.
Short-term spending deals, more deadlines, that potential for a 1% across the board cut. So what does it all mean politically for Speaker Johnson right now?
Right. I mean, I think the Speaker, right, and you'll talk to conservatives even about this. I think that they feel like he's doing, well, many at least feel like he's doing the best job he can right now. Like, this is a plan. The bills that are coming out are more in line with a top line that was already brokered. I mean, that's in line with a deal that was already brokered by Biden and his Johnson's predecessor, Kevin McCarthy, last year. I think after a certain point, people feel like, the writing's already on the wall. Some conservatives have already kind of written off these bills even before they came out because they don't like the top line. I think that this is just a time where Republicans have at least some shot at being able to shape government funding in some way and having an influence on crafting these levels in a way that's different from when Democrats last had control of Congress. But there is this understanding that they're not going to get all these wins. And it seems like right now some conservatives are giving Johnson grace, but we'll see what's going to happen in the weeks ahead, particularly when what comes out with Homeland Security funding, what comes out with State Department funding, Pentagon. So it remains to be seen.
Eris Foley, The Hill congressional reporter on C-SPAN's Washington Journal program this morning. Congressman Chip Roy, Republican of Texas, sharing a post on X by Elon Musk about the first package of spending bills up for a vote this week. Elon Musk's post says 3 things America needs: secure borders, safe cities, sensible spending. And then Congressman Roy adds, CC at House GOP, at Speaker Johnson, at Senate GOP, at Leader McConnell. Hint, the omnibills this week aren't this. And Senator Rick Scott, Republican of Florida, posting breaking. Senator Schumer just released the text of the first 6 spending bills we're supposed to vote on this week. That includes 605 pages of earmarks. One example, Schumer's $1 million ask to build a new environmental justice center in New York City. As always, you'll be able to follow the House live gavel to gavel on C-SPAN television. The Senate's live on C-SPAN 2. They're back on Tuesday. Wall Street today, the Dow down 97, Nasdaq down 67, S&P down 6. JetBlue Airways and Spirit Airlines announcing today that they have ended their merger agreement. This after a federal judge blocked them a few months ago. The airline saying in separate statements that the legal and regulatory approvals were not likely to be reached by the merger agreement's deadline of July. Energy Secretary Jennifer Granholm delivering remarks on clean energy investment and job creation during the National Urban League's Empowerment Summit in Washington today. She talked about clean energy policies, highlighting investments made from the Inflation Reduction Act and Infrastructure and Investment Jobs Act, and spoke about the jobs being created around the clean energy sector, and also talking about justice.
One of the important things that has been embedded into all of the funding that is coming out for all of these projects is that if you're vying for funding from the Department of Energy, you have to write up a community benefits plan, and you have to commit to benefiting the community, which is what you were talking about, Duane, what you were referring to about the large proportion of the community that will be benefiting. It has to include, are you hiring people locally? What is the benefit for air? What is the benefit for local businesses around these particular hubs or this particular project? So we're trying to embed structural equity into a system that has been structurally inequitable. And it's not just the community benefits plans, but it's also the way these tax incentives have been structured. So for example, say that you say you're a community solar developer. If you locate your project in a community, it's a disadvantaged community, you get extra credit, extra tax credits. If you have apprenticeship programs and pay prevailing wage, you get extra credit. If you use American-made solar panels, you get extra credit. So these are all stackable. And you can get up to 50 to 70% as a tax credit for this investment. Like, that is huge. 50 to 70%. That is irresistible. And that is going to drive equity throughout the system. And that's not just solar, that's a whole bunch of different types of projects. But so you might ask, okay, well the Inflation Reduction Act has been in place for a little bit of time. What are the results that we're seeing for these investments? Is it working? Come to find out, studies that were released just at the beginning of this year said that there has been 2 times the investment in disadvantaged communities relative to their size compared to other regions. 2 times. So folks, it's working. I'm just saying it's working, which is really gratifying. The tax credits are doing the work, which is really great.
Energy Secretary Jennifer Granholm today at the National Urban League's Empowerment Summit in Washington, D.C. Washington Today continues in a moment.
Hi, it's Nate from CSpan. Imagine, 45 years ago when there were just a handful of television networks, CSpan first went on the air, bringing an unfiltered view of government directly to America's living rooms. No spin, no commentary, just pure democracy in action.
And it's Shannon from CSpan. It was a bold experiment. We finally had a front row seat to Congress, the White House, and the campaign trail, all without government funding.
As we celebrate 45 years and a legacy of unfiltered access, we ask for your support of a donation in honor of over 4 decades of service. Your gift, no matter how big or small, will help maintain this vital resource for access to the democratic process.
You can help ensure another 45 years of witnessing history unfold and empowering citizens to be informed and engaged in the political process. Visit cspan.org/donate today and join our 45th anniversary campaign.
Thank you for supporting CSpan, your unfiltered view of government. Visit cspan.org/donate today to make your gift of support. Thank you.
Welcome back to Washington Today, available as a podcast on the CSpan Now mobile app, free, and wherever you find your podcasts. Story from USA Today, Vice President Kamala Harris set to meet Monday with Benny Gantz, a member of Israel's wartime cabinet and centrist political rival of Israeli President Benjamin Netanyahu, in a sign of growing White House frustration with the Israeli government. The White House meeting, which was not authorized by Netanyahu, presents a major test for President Joe Biden's relationship with that government. The U.S. has become increasingly at odds with Netanyahu over Israel's refusal to scale back the war in Gaza and its efforts to get humanitarian aid to Palestinian civilians. Harris on Sunday called for an immediate ceasefire of at least 6 weeks between Israel and Hamas, the most pointed statement yet by a member of the Biden administration on the need for an immediate pause in the fighting in Gaza. That was reporting from USA Today. Reporters asked Vice President Kamala Harris about what she hoped to achieve with the meeting.
You have a meeting coming up this afternoon. What's your message for Benny Gantz?
Well, we're going to discuss a number of things in terms of the priorities that certainly we have, which includes getting a hostage deal done, getting aid in, and then getting that 6-week ceasefire. You know, the president and I have been very clear that Israel has a right to defend itself, that we have got to make sure that innocent civilians aren't being killed, and that we've got to get these hostages out. And that is one of the highest priorities right now we have. And I'll tell you, the president has been an extraordinary leader in getting us to this point that we have the 6-week deal. And so Hamas needs to do its thing, as I talked about yesterday.
Your remarks yesterday got a lot of attention because they were pretty sharp against Israel. Is there any distance between you and President Biden on this issue?
The president and I have been aligned and consistent from the very beginning. Israel has a right to defend itself. Far too many Palestinian civilians, innocent civilians, have been killed. We need to get more aid in. We need to get the hostages out. And that remains our position. And I will tell you that it is important that we all understand that we're in a window of time right now where we can actually get a hostage deal done. We all want this conflict to end as soon as possible, and how it does matters.
Vice President Kamala Harris speaking with reporters after an event on a completely different subject in Washington. It was at the International Association of Firefighters conference, but getting questions about the war between Israel and Hamas. The headline at the Times of Israel, Netanyahu said to be fuming over Gantz's trip to U.S. planned without his approval. Benny Gantz also scheduled to meet with the Secretary of State Antony Blinken and the White House National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan. White House National Security Communications Advisor John Kirby held a virtual audio news conference today and asked about the humanitarian situation in Gaza.
Our first question will go to Steve with Reuters.
Thank you, John. For a while there, you were doing 200 truck deliveries a day into Gaza. What happened to that? I mean, why isn't Israel allowing more truck deliveries in there?
Steve, the numbers of trucks getting in, I think has fluctuated almost day to day. And at the high water mark, we were up over 200 trucks for some matter of days. But it's not been a level we've been able to sustain in a reliable fashion since the beginning of the war. There's lots of reasons for that. I mean, it is a war zone the actual combat operations can combine to make it hard to get trucks in. There's an inspection regime that can at times slow that process down at both crossings. And as I think we saw in recent weeks some protest activity at Kerem Shalom, which actually shut down Kerem Shalom for a few days. We engaged our Israeli counterparts to do what they could to allow for peaceful protest, but also locate the protesters in such a way that they were not a hindrance to the flow of aid. So there has been some obstacles to getting the aid in that are organic to the fact that we're talking about a war zone, but also there have been some inorganic obstacles thrown up in some cases by some members of the Israeli cabinet that have made it hard to get that aid in. And that's why I think you heard the president so very clearly make certain on Friday when he was meeting with Prime Minister Maloney that this is not a time for excuses. We've got to get more aid in. The ground routes, although there are obstacles and it can be cumbersome, it's still the best way to get the most aid in a quick fashion or the quickest fashion. And we've got to do everything we can to make sure that happens.
White House National Security Communications Advisor John Kirby in an online audio-only news conference and saying that the airdrops of food into Gaza that started over the weekend will continue. U.S. Embassy in Israel putting out a statement. We can confirm the death of an American employee of the U.S. Embassy in Jerusalem. It is not the U.S. ambassador. Foul play is not suspected. And they said they have no further details to share. United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights, Volker Turk, said today at a meeting of the UN Human Rights Council in Geneva that he's concerned the war between Israel and Hamas could spread with devastating impact on the people of the Middle East. He called it a powder keg.
The war in Gaza has already generated dangerous spillover in neighboring countries, and I'm deeply concerned that in this powder keg, any spark could lead to a much broader conflagration. This would have implications for every country in the Middle East and many beyond it. The military escalation in southern Lebanon between Israel, Hezbollah, and other armed groups is extremely worrying. Almost 200 people have been killed in Lebanon and some 90,000 internally displaced, with extensive damage to health facilities, schools, and vital infrastructure. Incidents in which civilians, including children, paramedics, and journalists, have been killed in attacks must be fully investigated. Some 80,000 Israelis have also been displaced from border areas of Israel. It's really important, it's imperative to do everything possible to avoid a wider spillover. In Yemen, the Ansar Allah group has been targeting commercial shipping across the Red Sea, disrupting global maritime trade and driving up the price of goods, with especially significant impact on developing countries. There is a serious risk of the conflict extending to Yemen itself, with potentially severe harm to Yemen's people already suffering from the humanitarian crisis generated by a decade of war. I again call for the immediate release of UN staff currently arbitrarily detained in Sana'a. In Syria, where there is still no clear path to a just and sustainable peace, conflict is once again escalating, 13 years after the onset of the catastrophic civil war, which was marked by horrific human rights violations and abuses. Hostilities have recently taken place along several front lines between parties in the northern part of the country, including airstrikes and shelling. We are assisting the Secretary General to set up an independent institution dedicated to missing persons in Syria, which will pave the way for victims, survivors, and their families' right to the truth.
United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights, Volker Turk, at the UN Human Rights Council meeting in Switzerland. New York Times reports that a UN report released on Monday said it had found grounds to believe that sexual violence occurred against women during the Hamas-led October 7th attack on Israel, and evidence that hostages being held in the Gaza Strip were also assaulted. It called for a full investigation. Story from ABC News: Haiti is under a state of emergency and nighttime curfew amid a surge of violence after armed gangs attacked the Caribbean country's two largest prisons and freed scores of inmates. The Haitian government declared the 72-hour state of emergency on Sunday evening and imposed a curfew from 6 p.m. to 5 a.m. in an effort, according to a press release, to restore the order and to take appropriate measures in order to regain control of the situation. That was from the article from ABC News. This came up at today's U.S. State Department briefing with spokesperson Matthew Miller.
The situation on the ground in Haiti
Yeah.
has deteriorated even further. What's the U.S. assessment of where things go from here? Our understanding is the Prime Minister is not in the country. Is the U.S. trying to facilitate his return there? And then are there any plans to evacuate the embassy at this point?
So, first of all, we are closely monitoring the situation and condemn efforts by gangs to further destabilize and take control of Haiti. It's our understanding that the Prime Minister is returning to the country. We think it's important that he do so and that he be allowed to do so. Many of those responsible for the uptick in violence have been designated by the United States under the Global Magnitsky Act and illicit drug sanctions programs, and by other members of the international community under their authorities. And I think the actions you've seen these gang members take over the last few days shows exactly why they have been so designated. And it also underscores the urgency of finalizing the multinational security support mission to assist the Haiti National Police in dealing with the dire security situation on the ground. With respect to the embassy remains open. We announced yesterday that the embassy has moved to limited operations with no public services available the first 3 days of this week due to the ongoing violence in Port-au-Prince.
State Department spokesperson Matthew Miller at his news conference in Washington. A State Department alert on Sunday reads, U.S. citizens in Haiti should depart Haiti as soon as possible by commercial or other privately available transportation options. In light of the current security situation and infrastructure challenges, U.S. citizens wishing to depart Port-au-Prince should monitor local news and information on security conditions from commercial transportation providers and should arrange to leave Haiti when security conditions permit doing so. Story from Voice of America, the U.S. State Department presenting its annual International Women of Courage Awards during a ceremony Monday at the White House. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken and First Lady Jill Biden are hosting the event, with the awards this year going to women from Afghanistan, Bangladesh, Belarus, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Myanmar, Cuba, Ecuador, Gambia, Iran, Japan, Morocco, Nicaragua, and Uganda. Here is some of the remarks from First Lady Jill Biden.
There is a kind of silence that hangs in the air around us, even in a crowded room. It sits beneath the ordinary, the blurs of our conversations between the rumble of car engines and the pounding of rain. It's the silence of children lost to war and violence, of men who no longer speak of their dreams because they can't picture what's ahead, of women whose words are smothered by communities and governments who wish to hold them back, who have wounds and spirits it will take time to mend, who speak but go unheard. It's the hush that falls when hope is so hard to find, under an authoritative thumb when rights slip away. The silence that seems to swallow cries for justice, for freedom, for equality. The women on this stage have refused to bend to that silence. You've spoken out for yourselves and for others in the face of fear and risk, and those who have tried to steal your voices away. As I read your stories, I was struck by that inner strength that each of you hold, a strength that you held on to even as others hoped to censor you, hoped you would stay quiet, that helped you raise your voices even when you were afraid, that helps you shout even when you're tired and say, we cannot wait. We deserve more now.
First Lady Jill Biden at the White House at the annual International Women of Courage Awards, given out since 2007 by the State Department, which says it has recognized more than 190 women from 90 countries who have demonstrated exceptional courage, strength, and leadership in advocating for peace, justice, human rights, gender equity and equality, and the empowerment of women and girls. Former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton today launching a new women's initiative at Columbia University's School of International and Public Affairs Institute of Global Politics. Hillary Clinton is a professor of international and public affairs at Columbia. Political writes that the initiative will produce research and policy recommendations on issues that disproportionately affect women. The research will span across 4 areas: women's economic opportunity, women's health, women's safety and security, and women's leadership, democracy, and human rights. Here is Hillary Clinton.
As we conceived this institute, there was never a question that we would not integrate women's perspectives in everything we were doing. There was to be no siloing of women's issues. Women's issues are, as Karen just reminded us, world issues. And some people might ask, well, still, why do we need another project on women's equality? Well, Karen gave you some insight as to what we believe will make IGP's initiative different. The world-class scholarship that will produce impactful policy recommendations, the convening of smart, inspiring women with expertise and experience to move us forward, the training of the next generation of women leaders, and yes, men who believe in equality too. But the real answer is we need this IGP Women's Initiative because women are not free or equal yet. So we welcome you, and I am particularly pleased that Her Royal Highness Princess Mabel is here. She has been a great leader globally in women's inclusive economic prosperity. And we want this to be a global outreach, to learn what we can learn from anywhere and anybody across the world.
Hillary Clinton, former Secretary of State, former U.S. Senator, former Democratic presidential candidate at Columbia University in New York City today, the launch of her new Women's Initiative. Thanks for listening to Washington Today. Subscribe to C-SPAN's free evening newsletter word for word and get the stories making headlines in Washington sent to your inbox every day. Sign up at cspan.org/connect. Have a good night.